I'm Mary Lyons, and I am the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander from Benchmark Income Group.
And this is the Big Wealth Podcast.
Everything you've ever been taught about money is wrong.
But don't worry, we're here to help.
On this podcast, we'll use the same tools you already know to actually help set you free.
Free to do what you want with your time, with your money, and with your energy. Free to live your life the way you have dreamt about.
So we're going to talk about wealth knowledge, personal reflections, and the financial industry news of the day.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. We have Ann Kip Watson, right? It goes by Kip. I have her in my phone as Ann, and I can never find her because I'm always typing in Kip, and I don't know why I haven't.
Not my mom, so that would be the only reason. Yeah.
So Kip is a sports psychologist and a therapist. And she is an amazing human being. And then I'm just going to throw this in there. In addition to all of that, you have several, I think, Super Bowl rings from the Women's National Football Conference because you yourself were a professional football player. Is that how I say that? Yeah, I think that's right. And then with the work that you're doing in sports psychology, you have helped the team achieve 3 additional Super Bowls in consecutive years, right? So this is all very exciting stuff. And I'm excited to have you here today because I think we can learn a lot from you on that sort of success mindset. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Well, and I know I'm supposed to have an initial question, but I have a pre-initial question. What position did you play?
Mostly free safety, which I was, chasing down wide receivers half my age, but that's where they stuck me. I was hoping to play linebacker, but I wasn't quite big enough.
Nice. Yeah, I've met you in person a number of times, and you don't look like a linebacker. I picture this sort of like refrigerator-sized human being, sort of crushing souls as they walk, and you're not that way, right?
No.
So how did you get into this? I mean, how did you get into sort of the sports psychology piece of it, and trying to play sort of women's football?
Okay, the short headlines to that. I mean, I grew up with a father who was a collegiate athlete, and he taught ed psych at the Ohio State University. And so I watched him use the science that I use with my athletes. I saw him use that with the men and women's golf team there at Ohio State. I grew up a competitive athlete. Yes, when I turned into my 40s, yes, I started playing women's tackle football, which naturally put me around a lot of high-level athletes. And that's about the time, about 12, 13 years ago, when I really focused my practice in terms of therapy more towards sports psychology. So it really is a combination of mental performance as well as like therapeutic issues, because every athlete's life is going to have both.
Right. Well, they don't just get out on the field or on the courts or on the links and do their stuff, right? They go home and turn into human beings with issues, right? And you had mentioned before that you were dealing with sort of dependency, but before you got into sort of the more pure sports psychology.
Yeah, I worked in a chemical dependency outpatient unit for about 9 years, and then started my private practice. And it was kind of in that period of, leaving chemical dependency and entering into private practice, where I just thought athletes are where I want to serve. It's the population I identify with. It's the population I love helping. There's always issues off the field, so to speak, that affect on the field, whether it's financial, relational, addiction. Like there's always those therapeutic issues that need to be addressed.
That's so cool. And do you see a common theme across sort of all athletes? Sorry, Mary.
Go for it.
She sparked a deal, but do you see? Not the dependency side of it, but do you see the sort of thread that runs through them?
Every athlete's brain code, thus the name of my company, Brain Code and Neural Sport. Brain Code more the executive coaching, Neural Sport, the athlete coaching. Every innate wiring is different, and it comes with it different strengths and weaknesses depending on the job you're asking the individual to do or perform. So there are some similar threads, but everybody's very different.
So I think this is really interesting. One of the conversations that we have in our office a lot has to do with individualization. Because I think the world kind of says you need to be a certain way. And even when you think about athletes, I feel like there's a certain picture, like high discipline, very like works well within structure. But I think even within the world of athletes, you have some high performers who have ginormous egos and think it's all about them. And then there's people, for example, like Emmitt Smith, who we just heard talk actually a couple days ago, who talks all about humility and the importance of recognizing that you can't do it on your own and that there's a whole team that works with you. And so when you start looking at some of this, can you talk to some of the traits that that are similar, and then where you start to see some of the differences? Because I know even from previous conversations, there are certain brain codes that are good at certain positions. And sometimes when you get people, they're, they might be in the right sport, but the wrong position or that sort of thing, because I feel like that transfers over to life too.
Right.
That makes sense. That was kind of a weird, I'm not sure I even asked that as a question, but
I understood what you're saying.
But talk to me a little bit about brain coding and how someone's good for whatever position they're playing.
Well, I'll look at what the job or position requires. For instance, like we've been talking about football, the mental requirements for an offensive lineman are very different than the mental requirements for a linebacker or even a defensive end, a corner. Defense versus offense mentality are like different types of mentalities. And you saw that played out actually in the movie about Michael Orr. And as an offensive lineman, he had this innate wiring to protect. And then there are innate wirings that want to destroy you. So yes, there are people that tend to be more wired, for instance, to be relational. And those people tend to do better like in a field like mine. Someone who's more wired to be task oriented do better in a field like yours, dealing with numbers and people's money. But you've had to learn to be relational, especially if you want to sell it, or because you're dealing with such an important and messy part of people's lives like I am. You got to have those relational skills, but they may not have come as innate as it would to someone who's wired more that way. And that's a difference in a brain code between decision-making function of thinking and decision-making function of feeling. Both have emotion, but they just make decisions very differently. And you can tell that by how they lead a conversation. What do they start with? Do they start with, how you doing? How the wife and kids? Or do they start with task, right? What's on the agenda today?
I'm just laughing because when you got on the Zoom meeting kind of before we launched everything, the first thing I did was like, okay, so we have a quick agenda. Let's go through these things, right? And I was no more fuzzy.
Right? You weren't like, how's Josh, right? You weren't, that's not,
Right.
Like,
oh, it's terrible. It's terrible.
No, it's innate how you are. But when you're in a position of like entrepreneurship, when you're in a position of sales, and you're trying to talk to a potential customer or even a current client, you got to lead with what they lead with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you're using Myers-Briggs for most of your sort of categorization, right? Most of your training.
That I have found is one of the best ways to help people understand mental processes. It's not a personality, it's mental process or preference but the combination of the four creates some very distinct differences. So that combined with what we know about neuroscience now and neuroscience of the brain being played out into physical aptitudes and abilities, yes, I can kind of give some guidance that's, you know, fairly accurate in terms of like physical skill or physical dominance, depending on that brain code. Yeah.
So therapists, you want NFs, you don't want NTs as therapists, but maybe as a quarterback, you want a thinker more than a feeler or something like that.
Correct. They're about, like at quarterback, there are 5 brain codes that tend to do fairly well, but the best is an ESTP, just because they have an innate ability to read, react, respond the quickest, and they don't get butthurt if they make a mistake. Like they'll just, they don't take it personally, and they don't have all this time they got to recover from it. They just go again.
Right, like a pitcher, right? You just figure out, okay, slough the last one off. I walked the guy. Let's get after it again, right?
So, okay, so I actually want to go a little bit deeper into this in terms of even how we work with our clients and how they process around money, right? Yeah. Because when you think about athletes, I think one of the things that sets really tremendous athletes apart from, you know, more like normal skill sets is this ability to understand what reality is and to seek out feedback that makes them better. Whereas a lot of times when you think of athletes who don't progress beyond certain skill levels, it's either because they don't have the desire or they aren't actively seeking out the feedback. Because I see frequently in life, and I talk to my kids about this a lot, you don't want to only look at the things that are problem areas for you and let them kind of overtake your sense of self-worth and be like, well, I can't do this, so I'm not worthy, or whatever the language is. But you have to be able to say, like, this is a weakness, and if I'm going to get better, I have to change these behaviors in order to grow and get better. Can you talk to, like, are there specific brain codes that are more prone to looking for that feedback, or is that really a unique thing? And then how they cope with it changes. How do you see those brain codes interacting with the ability to accept, I don't want to say criticism, let's use coaching, right?
Well, and is it, and I'll tag on a question on that is, can you learn that?
Yes.
Can you learn not to get butthurt, or to use your words, right?
I know, sorry, yeah.
That's the technical therapist term for
yeah.
Right?
You got offended by that, didn't you?
No, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant.
No, I just hear that all the time, and
it's a great
I've
word.
even said that to a parent too, not just, yeah. There are certain, well, every brain code definitely wants feedback in a certain way. Now, feelers will want it more one-on-one and not said in front of everyone, and that's very true of like introverts too. They'll want that feedback one-on-one. There are some brain codes that no matter how you deliver it, they may get hurt by it or offended by it. And there's different reasons for that. There's about 4 to 6 brain codes where competency and adequacy are huge human drives. And so if you start questioning their adequacy in any way, that feels threatening and they don't like it. Now, it's different when they go ask and seek it out because they're trying to be more competent or trying to be more adequate. But then there's those people that if they decide that they're not going to be adequate the first time they do it, they're just not going to do it. They're kind of in and out. It's all or nothing with them. And those people tend to have the hardest time. They're the ones that tend to get angry or anxious a lot. And they have trouble kind of, to what you were saying a little bit earlier, seeking out failure, seeking out being embarrassed, seeking out looking like an idiot. And that's a part of life. Like, we have to be okay with that.
What's the only way you learn?
Uncomfortable.
It is. Well, I mean, like for me and even finances, like uncomfortable for me. I was never taught about it. And so all the conversations that I've had with both of you over the years, it's like it's humbling for me because I just was never taught about wealth or wealth building, finances, keeping track of all that. So when I started out as an entrepreneur, like I just had to figure it out. And even if I looked ridiculous or dumb or that felt like a stupid question to me, like I ask it anyway.
Right.
That's just a part of it because you're not going to be competent in everything.
Sure.
You're just not.
Well,
So
I keep reminding my son about that. It's like, I don't know if you remember this because you were one. But when you were trying to walk, you fell down a lot. Like
right.
you fell over and then you didn't, but you didn't think, oh, I'm just going to lay here on the ground because everyone's laughing at me. Like
Right.
you got up, we rubbed the knot on your head to try to make it not so massive because you ditched into the concrete somewhere, right? And then you got up and you tried it again and you fell over and you got it up. And like that somewhere along the way, you fell down and somehow that was a bad thing. Like, and I don't know what happened in your brain that
Well,
did.
it's what happens as we grow as humans and our cognitive and emotional development hit a stage of self-awareness. And that starts to happen 10, 11, 12, 13, kind of in those 4 years. And then it really blossoms in teenagehood. And that's why those years are kind of tumultuous because we're coming face to face with kind of reality. And life isn't just about having fun and you're kind of oblivious to the difficulties of reality. And so as that self-awareness grows, also you really start to see the differences, especially as parents in your kids and how they're innately mentally wired.
So I just want to, for a minute, I want to talk about your kid because I think he's amazing. So Josh has interned with us. This was his second year. And as a human being and also as an employee, he is a tremendous asset because he looks for the areas where there are problems and then just says, hey, here's what I think we could do to make this better. And his sense of, I think, self-confidence in a business environment for someone who's, still in college is amazing to me because he understands his value and what he can bring to an organization. And he is not afraid to advocate for those things. And I mean, honestly, I'm sure he can get a job anywhere, but I would hire him in a heartbeat when he graduates full time because he just comes in as like, yep, that's the problem. I'm going to fix it. And it's
way his brain is wired. Yes.
But the thing about it is, right, regardless of how, so I'm sure there are other people who have similar functional coding, right? Can you talk a little bit to how, like, knowing what how as a parent, you helped foster the sense of confidence and the discipline and the work ethic and the openness for growth and that sort of thing, because I think as parents, sometimes as parents we don't have all those things, right? And so the ability to foster it in another human being is such a big deal. And part of the reason that I love doing this podcast is I get to ask people questions that are incredibly self-serving. And I'm like, what do I need to do different than
You're asking for a friend, Mary? It's not.
Yeah,
right. Asking for a friend. But ultimately, like the whole point of what Eric and I are trying to do, both with our company on the financial side and just in general, is to kind of get people to that place of like, hey, I can have these things in my life. Because as kids, we have, awe, wonder, all these dreams, these hopes. And I think a lot of that disappears over time because suddenly we're adults and we have to pay the bills and there's all these have tos and we don't get to do the want tos as much. And I really think that if we're going to live our best life, it can't just be about the money conversation. All the side conversations have to come with it, right? And so what I'm really looking for is partly like, how do we get those sorts of mindsets into our kids so that they don't have some of the same issues that like I've had to process through and that sort of thing. And then as adults, how can we get to a space where we're more open to that if that's not the natural bent? And I know that was a long, complicated wind up with multiple questions, but.
Well, I have a short answer to that and then maybe a more expanded answer to that. The number one reason why people do not achieve their goals or objectives is they're not willing to suffer. They're not willing to kind of what we were talking about. They're not willing to be embarrassed, fall down, screw up, mess up, and allow that to change them. And that is something from a very young age that I started doing with both my kids. You're obviously more familiar with Josh, but Josh, yeah, don't listen to this, Josh. Telling stories.
His head will never make it through another door as long as
I know. No, well, he knows I share this story because it was very impactful. I mean, he is very introverted. But at an early age, I had him do very uncomfortable things. And I think one of those, and he and I just talked about it not too long ago, one of those very defining moments for him was when he was about 9 or 10 years old, and we're sitting in the busy Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and he kind of tugs on me. He's like, "Mom, I'm hungry. Can I get a sandwich?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I hand him $10, and I'm like, "I'll sit right here and I'll watch you go get your sandwich." And it was like, right?
Yeah.
Just convulsing, tears rolling down his eyes. He's this little kid in a big airport, and it just was a scary moment for him. And I just stayed calm, and I just repeated a couple times, and I was like, "You're hungry. You can go do it. I'll be right here." About 10 minutes later, he got up and went over there, got the sandwich, and came back, and the smile on his face was huge. And in that moment, I could have crippled his confidence.
Right.
It's a simple thing for us as adults to walk over there, right, and get the sandwich. But I knew he would be nervous to do it. So I'm like, here's the opportunity for him to be nervous and scared and overcome it.
Yeah.
And overcome it.
Well, I love that you created that safe space, right? Like you didn't make him feel ashamed that he was nervous, right? You gave him the space to feel the feelings and then to overcome them. And then he got the reward of having to do that, right? And could see it. And I'm sure you were effusive as well, right? And that, I mean, so this is a total aside, but we just got back from a leadership conference with One America this past week. And my son, he's very amiable and he's very chatty once he warms up, but he's got to warm up first. And so he gets embarrassed easily, and will kind of, pull back when he starts feeling that way. And probably as an adult, he's going to be very angry that I shared this story. But when we were putting in the names for how we wanted them to be read on the name tags, he said, "Make me Connor Pirate Lyons." And so we put his middle name in as Pirate. And so his name tag said Connor Pirate Lyons. So the executives and a bunch of members from One America get kind of the list of all the attendees and which family members they're bringing ahead of time, most of which have at least the pictures of the individual that works with One America. And they noticed that Connor had Pirate in his name. And so I can't tell you how many people came up to me and asked me if that was really his middle name, because Emily had Emily Elizabeth Lyons. And they were like, if it said Emily Mermaid Lyons, we would have known like it was a thing. But because it was that, they were like, so people were asking me. So I told Connor that, and he was like, well, it's not really Pirate. And I'm like, yeah, but. So one of the gentlemen who works in a kind of senior position had asked me, is that his name? And so I pointed Connor to him and I said, go over there and say, excuse me, Mr. Cox, I just wanted to tell you, yarg, I'm a pirate, right? And so Connor's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, no, you need to go do it because it's going to make him laugh and he's going to think it's really funny. And so Connor is like, well, I'm big on like incentives, right? So if there's something that like for me, if there's a big enough reward, I will make myself uncomfortable, but partly because I know he's shy and doesn't like introducing himself to people. It's the same kind of concept. Like I'm going to put you into a situation where you can do it. So I told him if he would go do it, he could have $5. And he is like, great. And I'm going to give him the money anyways, because I told him I'd give him souvenir money, but I'm like, you're going to earn it. And so he's like, no, I don't want to do it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to do it. So he runs over and he just goes, excuse me, Yarg, I'm a pirate, right? And only Steve's wife sees him and the others are engaged in conversation. So he comes back and he's like, got his head down and he's at the table and he's like, okay, I did it. And I was like, no, you didn't, because Steve didn't see you. And so he's like, what? And I'm like,
he just ran up and delivered the line.
And then he came back and I said, you have to go over there and you have to make eye contact with him and then do it.
Right.
And so, because Steve and I had like this whole conversation about Connor and pirates and that kind of stuff. And so he finally, he's like, okay, I'm going to do it. So he takes a deep breath and he goes over and this is a group. There's like 6 adults talking and he kind of squeezes through them and taps Steve on the arm. And Steve looks down and says, yes. And Connor just goes, and I can hear him from like across the room. He goes, Yarg, I'm a pirate. Right. And then like, totally is like, okay, I did it. And you can see him look and I go like this and he's like, great. He comes back and Steve makes eye contact with me and just starts laughing. And then he comes over and like jumps right into it. And they have a whole pirate conversation, right? Like in pirate voices. He's like, you're the coolest, and walks off. And Connor was like, cause it's something he thinks is cool. And it allowed this adult to meet him on his level. And then like, the president of the company came over and talked to him in a pirate voice. And so it became this thing where like all the executives were talking to my kid in a pirate voice. And Connor was like, he said to me at some point, he's like, this is kind of embarrassing, Mom. And I'm like, but how cool is it that you started this movement and now all these grownups are talking to you like they're kids and like they're pirates because you did that. And so it's fun to me to start to see kids almost like get over themselves a little bit. And he could see like, yeah, okay, wait a minute, this is kind of cool. And like, it just like at some point, you just kind of can't take yourself too seriously, I guess, is the way I look at that. And then Emily was like, well, how do I make $5? Right. And I'm like, okay.
She doesn't care about the pirate bit.
She doesn't at all. And then I'm like, all right, we got to create at least equal opportunity for success. And there was a guy at our table who was like, well, I want to do a magic trick for you, but I don't have a penny. So why don't, how do I get this penny? And I was like, I tell you what, if you go around the room and you find a penny, then I'll give you $5. Well, here's the thing. When you're at a conference that has a bunch of salespeople at it and you ask for a penny, it is amazing how frequently people will say, well, I don't have a penny, but I got $1, right? And so, dude, she raked in the cash. and at the end of it, she, like, one person left the event, went to their room, got a penny and brought it back to her. And we ended up with 3 pennies at some point and a handful of cash. Right. And so, she's a little more precocious. I wish I had her confidence because she will talk to absolutely anybody. But to me, it's like the couple of times people kind of like made a face. I was like, we're working on overcoming call reluctance. And then everybody kind of giggled and went with it. But I don't know, these experiences, like it's easier to do that with your kids because they don't have that fear yet. Right. As adults, how do we do that for ourselves?
Well, before you jump in, because I wanted to go back to your story, because you said you told Josh to go do the thing. Go, here's your money, go get the sandwich. And then there was a throwaway line in there that I think we all just blew past. He sat there for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't just like, okay, Mom, I got it. I'm on my way. It's
idiot.
Like
he really had to
processing
convince himself to go because he was so anxious, right? But that's what anxiety does. It causes us to freeze or hesitate, which when that happens, we miss opportunities. Call reluctance or hesitating to do that, right, leads to missing opportunities, which leads to missing revenue, missing relationship building, all those types of things that are involved in sales and entrepreneurship. I mean, God, do I have my own stories with that as an introvert of missing opportunities, and big ones that probably cost me a tremendous amount. So even knowing that about myself and then seeing that in my child was something that I was very like aware of. And so when I saw those opportunities for him, you know, I would make sure and make it uncomfortable for him. Like you don't want to make it
Right.
easy for your kids. And this is the mistake I see parents make all the freaking time, is making it easy, protecting them, shielding them from reality, or doing hard things. And that's a problem. Like even now when I go and do workshops for coaches, I mean, the last 10 years, I've seen coaches even saying like, I can't push kids anymore like I used to because I'm going to get the parent in my office. And I'm like, ugh.
Right.
Ugh, no, like we got to address that, parents, you know?
They had a buddy of mine is a Marine Reserve, and we sort of chat back and forth about sort of the state of, I never, you know, unfortunately I never did that, a big regret of mine, but so I live vicariously through him, right? And we were reading an article about sort of the state of the Navy and some of the stuff going on. And that was exactly what was going on, is that all of these senior leaders that are used to making split-second decisions, life and death, we got to save the ship, all these kind of sort of stuff that they're supposed to be doing are not. And they're not doing it, not because they don't know the right answer. They're doing it because they're afraid of getting some news reporter in there, or that some of their underlings are going to come in and gripe about a call that they've made, or and they're turning into scaredy cats, basically. I mean, there's people that are commanding thousands of people.
Mentally soft people.
Right. And I think it's to that point, we never got that, we never fell down on our face and had to shake it off and get back up. I mean, Emmett Smith talked about that, and a couple days ago, he said, you know, the coaches that he respected the most were the ones that pushed him far, 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 far beyond what he thought was possible.
Right.
And it's the stupid, I'm going to butcher the line, it was Seneca, right? That like, how horrible is it for someone to have never been tried or never to have been tested because they don't know what they're worth. They don't know what they could overcome because they've never had that chance. Again, what a horrible failure from that person.
But
That's
I think
not
a
how
lot
Seneca
of people,
put it. I explained it.
But I think a lot of people don't want to know what they're capable of or not capable of because they're scared of what the answer could be if it fails, right? I mean, there's a book called The Alchemist by, I think it's Pablo Coelho. And what I took from that book, because it's been like 20 years since I read it, was that the hardest thing to accomplish is the thing that you want the most. Because if you throw everything you have into it and you fail, what does that say about you? Right. But I look at myself and I would rather try, right? Because even if I fail, I probably accomplish more than most people, right? If you're pushing yourself.
All the research that we've done on the elderly population, when it comes to regret, that's the thing. The ones that are living with deep regret are the ones that had a vision or had a dream or had a goal and they never went after it.
So
because of that fear.
So what tips do you have to help people cope with that? Because I remember like early in my career, like my first year as an advisor was relatively easy because I was in a market where I knew a bunch of people and I made the transition because I had been in mortgage and my clients were asking me to be their financial advisor. So it was a very easy transition. But about 6 months into that, we moved to Dallas and I didn't know anybody here and it was brutal. And I do remember having a conversation with my dad because my dad is very successful and very polished. And I always say where he's eloquent, I'm enthusiastic, right? Like I may not be quite as eloquent as him. I am definitely, I got the enthusiasm in spades. But I had this moment where I was literally failing out of the business. I mean, I was not in a great place. My new husband, because we had just gotten married, wasn't available emotionally because he was at the library all the time because your first year in law school really determines where you're going to get a job. And so he was throwing himself into that. And I found myself alone, isolated. I'm right on the cusp between introvert and extrovert. I skew slightly towards extrovert. But I have a hard time when I don't know anybody and there's no context and I don't have a place. And so I found myself in this space where I was horribly depressed. I was not competent in my job. In that I was new, right? And so you don't know what you don't know until suddenly you realize you don't know it. And I didn't want anyone to perceive that I was only successful because my dad helped me. So I rejected all of his mentoring and coaching, right? Which made it a lot harder for me. And I remember my dad saying, like, this is the first time in your life that you've ever had to struggle, right? Like things just kind of came naturally. And I did the things that came naturally to me and not the things that didn't. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, honestly, like, I can't say how I managed to, it's not like there was a pivotal moment where I was like, duh, and then it started on this success change. Like it was just a series of very small, like, wake up, do the thing, wake up, do the thing. And it was horrifically uncomfortable. Like I remember that as like probably one of the most unhappy moments of my life, because it was just struggle and strife, failure, failure, failure. And I will say that reading John Maxwell's book, Failing Forward, had a tremendous impact on my ability to fail and not feel bad about myself. And Eric, I think you and I probably read that at about the same time.
Yeah, we both needed it.
But how do you create that for your kid, right? Because, or as an adult, how do you find that place inside of yourself that says like, no, I'm going to do this, right? When everyone around you might be telling you to give up.
Well,
like Gordon, for example, like he didn't make the team, right? And that for him was a defining moment.
Well, and like Josh had some of those experiences, so did my daughter. And even when I first told family members, hey, I'm going to try out for this women's football team, I'm like, I was laughed at. They're like, do you realize how old you are? And I'm like, yeah, but I love this game and I want to try. Like, I want to try. They may laugh at me or they may tell me like, that's crazy. But like, I think it comes down to a decision. It comes down to a belief and a conviction. And that's part of the high performance habit of clarity. In that, for example, confidence is not a feeling. And a lot of people think of it as a feeling. Well, I don't feel confident, or I lost my confidence. I'm like, well, where'd you put it? You know,
we should put a beeper on it so we could find it.
Right. Confidence is a belief. It is a conviction, so to speak. Like, I'm going to try, I'm going to do. Your feelings will kind of go up and down. You're going to feel doubt when you screw up. You're going to feel really great when you land the deal. You're going to feel doubt when you see your money like dip down, right? You're going to feel, yay, like I'm making good decisions when you see that nest egg rise. Like, it's the feelings that are doing this, but your confidence or the belief in yourself to figure things out is a constant. So you got to make the objective decision based on the belief, not your feeling, if that makes sense.
Is that harder for people who are Fs as opposed to Ts on the Myers-Briggs?
Yes, because they are relationally oriented first versus task. Somebody who's more task oriented will kind of, yes, I'm going to figure out what needs to be done to get this done. And unless it's that combination, NTs are very wired for competence, STs very wired for competence too, especially if they're Js.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to fail, then I might avoid doing it. But again, if your belief is, I believe in my ability to figure this out. Okay. That's what drove me when I went to play football. It's what drives me now to understand finances, because that part, financial world, not taught, doesn't come naturally to my brain code. It doesn't motivate me. I'm not motivated to make money. there's people very wired to be financially secure. That's not true for me. I'm more wired to make a difference in somebody's life and like, gotta pay me. Well, you can't do that, right? I gotta provide.
Well, I remember the conversation we had, what was it, 2 weeks? I don't know, my days are all mixed up, right? But
A couple weeks ago.
how do you produce what you're worth, or how do you say what you're worth, and what's worth in your head versus what other people actually pay? It's like, well, that's a big difference, right? I remember the conversation that Joe, Mary's dad, had. He said, yeah, when I first got in the business, and it was my first big client, and they were saying, yes, I will do your deal, I will buy your thing, right? And I remember him saying, it's like his hand was shaking so bad because he's like, he'd never seen that much money in one spot in his life, kind of thing, and sort of like instead of handing over the piece of paper, he was like shaking, and so he just put it on the table and like pushed it over, right? Because he didn't want to let him know that, boy, that was a big deal, right? So, but I think it's that we have to get over that mental hurdle that like, maybe I am worth this, right? It's that I think there's a self-worth that's sort of built into there.
Well, and I know, like, for me, like, I had to do, about 5 years ago, I did about a deep dive on what it is I do believe about money. Because while I had this confidence with like sports and figuring some of that out, like money, it really like I felt like it just like eluded me. Like I could see it in myself. Like I'm avoiding listening to podcasts like this. I am avoiding reading stuff to try to learn, but I can't. Like I gotta figure this out. And so even though it's uncomfortable and I'm not competent, go back to the objective definition of confidence. I believe in my ability to figure this out, regardless of where my feelings are, right? So that stays stable.
Well, and we're running out of time. And I actually think that is the perfect note to end on, right? That I believe in my ability to figure this out. Because I think a lot of people don't even have the conversation about finances for exactly the reasons that you're just saying. It's scary. They don't know it. They don't want to look stupid in front of somebody else. They're afraid of being taken advantage of. And I can tell you that on our end of the table, especially with new advisors, frequently we leave a meeting and the conversation is, it's not that they don't trust you, it's that they don't trust themselves. Right. And so they don't feel like they could, sometimes people can't make a decision and it has nothing to do with what you're putting out there. So it's not that you could have done a better job. Even in some circumstances, people just are scared, right? Because they don't trust themselves or they've made mistakes in the past. And they see those mistakes as things that define them, as opposed to like a circumstantial thing that happened that I can learn from and overcome. And so I first of all, I just want to applaud you for that mindset, because it's very refreshing. But I think it also is going to put you into a wonderful place. And I think if, for me, I'm probably going to write out confidence is a belief, not a feeling, because there are definitely times where I feel insecure or I worry, like, is what I'm doing going to be effective and how are people going to perceive this and that sort of thing. And understanding that the belief in almost what you do or what you choose to do as your purpose is the important part, and the feelings, like knowing they will ebb and flow. It's like people say, do what you're passionate about. Well, passion's a feeling, right? It comes and goes. Do what you believe your purpose is, right? That purpose is very set, right? Like you make a decision about that purpose.
That's your foundation.
Right. And then you look to do those things, right?
Yeah. And it goes to your point about your ability to suffer, because if I know that eventually I'm going to keep getting up and it's going to work, then I'm okay suffering.
Correct.
And Eric, you should tell that story about the rats. I think it's appropriate here.
I was just thinking that. Yeah. So I'm going to give it the short version of this, right? So some sort of Harvard study in the 50s or something like that. So they wanted to see how long a rat would struggle before they just gave up and drowned. So they put these rats in this
they saved them, so they didn't actually drown.
Yeah, they didn't actually drown. But basically these rats were struggling, and they struggled for 15 minutes. And then they were basically just getting tired, and you could tell that they were about to give up, right? And so the researchers would pull them out, dry them off, get them sort of set up, ready to go. And then they put them back into the deal to see if the second time around, what would happen, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't go for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes before they gave up. They went for 60 hours. before they started to give up. And I think it was 60 hours, right? Something Jordan, but the idea was that they knew that on the other end they weren't going to die. Before, they didn't know that. They didn't know if this was going to be it. But now they knew that there was somebody there that was going to come save them, and everything was going to be okay. They weren't going to literally drown, right? So they went for hours and hours and hours and hours before they finally gave up.
So they pushed themselves beyond the physical and the mental limits that they previously had imposed on themselves, which just speaks to the power of hope. And to me, that is a whole nother podcast. We're going to have you on again, so we can go like deeper into beliefs and all this kind of stuff.
Every week we're going to have you.
But I think this is so key, right? Like, you set your purpose, you make your decision, you work with the discipline behind that, and then you work from the standpoint of, I have a belief that I can and will figure this out.
Right. And that's the fact, you understand, but a lot of people, I think, where they end up struggling is they don't understand that foundational necessity or purpose.
Yeah.
So therefore they're not willing to struggle because they don't really know what they're struggling for.
They're not committed, right? They're not bought into what they're doing. And so it's not meaningless, but it's not meaningful, I guess.
Yeah.
So Kip, if people want to find more about you and your company, where do they do that?
Well, website is very easy. It's braincodecorp.com. And then most of my social media is Kip, K-I-P Fit, F-I-T, Kip Fit.
I love it.
Instagram, Twitter, I even have Snap, even though don't really use it all that much, but yeah.
Well, I follow you on Instagram and I absolutely love it. I like your deep thoughts at a red light. I find those.
Yeah, I posted one of them today. Yes.
Yeah. So we highly recommend that you go out and you find Kip. If you're looking for us, you can find me at my handle on Facebook and LinkedIn, and Instagram is @TheWealthWoman. And you can check out our website at wealthwoman.com, or you can check out our company website at Benchmark Income Group. Oh, no, I'm saying that wrong. It's benchmarkincome.com. And Eric, where can they find you?
At Economics with Eric on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook and all the rest. So
perfect. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you, Kip.
You're welcome.